It's for the fans.
Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, 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 Dixieland. Parades come rally, oh, this is the time and place. The International High unites the...
All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Dixieland and the Proletariat. We're going to talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Make sure to like us on social media at Dixieland of the Proletariat, or find all of our links at our link tree at linktree/.prol. That's DOT-PROL. Where if you want to give your wages to a bunch of rednecks, you'll find a link to our Patreon. We got a lot of cool stuff to give you, including CDs, stickers, a cookbook, Discord server, and exclusive episodes. We also have a Spotify playlist with some great artists you also check out, as well as our merch store. This podcast is brought to you by contractional monogamy, not being able to afford therapy, living at home, beta blockers, Kaiser pushing white men in the swamps, Nelson's love life, Tyler's hiatus, Mark's laughter, which brings joy to the masses, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, who I assume are all zombies at this point. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers, Andrew, Jacob, Nicholas, MWANKND. I don't know if that's some Zoomer thing. And then, hold on, I gotta do this as Nixon. Himiko no Kimmy wanted me to do this in my Richard Nixon impersonation voice. Don't look at me like that. It's for the fans. Our monthly Patreon surplus goes to groups that are run by and are help marginalized people directly. As always, I'm Nelson with.
I'm not dealing with any more of your impersonations. I don't care if it's for a fan.
They paid for that, and do you want to give it another run?
They did. Oh, Himiko no Kimmy. Oh, sounds like a drugged up communist to me. And our guest this evening is...
I am Donald Guillory, author, historian, educator. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Mississippi, and currently I am a history instructor at Arizona State University.
Hell yeah. I know that you... Welcome. I know that you also hate the University of Alabama. I'm sorry that your decisions are wrong and your choices are bad and everything, but it's cool. It's fine. It's whatever.
After the conversation we had before we started recording talking about academia, I'm surprised you can even pull that with a straight face, Nelson.
First off, it's football, not academia.
You could have fooled me.
The real reason for college is football. We all know that, especially in the South.
Hey, that's the real reason for school desegregation in the SEC.
There you go. Bear Bryant was like, hey, I want to win.
Yeah, it wasn't Forrest Gump. It was seeing somebody else run up and down his field and like, why can't you catch him? What the hell's going on here? And there was actually, I think it was at an Alabama game or an Auburn game, they were playing and the other team had a black running back. Some woman in the crowd said, we need to get one of them on our team. And like the rest of the crowd was silent. And then all of a sudden they were all in unison, like, yeah, we need to get one of them on our team too. I'm like,
it's like baby steps, y'all, baby steps. Can you imagine just the awkward silence? It's like you can hear a pen drop, you see the crickets, then all of a sudden it clicks. It's like, hey, wait, we could win.
Yeah.
It's just races coming together to promote integration in football. It's the American way.
Hey, you see how quickly Mississippi got rid of the flag when all the football players came out and said, we're not playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no one questioned them. They were kind of like, you know what? They have a point. Like, they've had a...
The athletic director and like the chancellor was like, so wait, how much money are we going to lose if they don't play? Yeah, we hate that flag. We're going to go ahead and change it. We're not the rebels.
It's not
anymore.
even COVID. We're not even going to worry about COVID. We need to change that. Forget any of the any of the requirements we have to ensure that people are going to be safe. They're not going to get sick on campus. They're not going to die. You know what? You guys are going to play and we'll get rid of the flag.
It almost reminds me back when we had to study this in class in Southern politics about when David Duke ran for, was it senator or governor in Louisiana or both in Louisiana, when Shaq was at LSU and he was like, if that motherfucker wins, I quit. And then people were like, oh God, no, we can't lose Shaq. Fuck that David Duke dude.
Oh my God.
Man.
Yeah, because he ran up until what was it, 26? He was running in 2016, I think.
Yeah.
And one of my relatives got one of the robocalls from him, and the robocall was littered with every last dog whistle you could imagine. It was like, you need to elect me so we can send a message to those Black Lives Matter thugs. And I forgot what other language he was using, but I'm sitting like, this is hilarious. Like, this is a really old racist human being that still has some pull, because Charlottesville hadn't happened yet. It was 2016. So he still has some pull to where people actually believe this nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that he's still around is just like, how is he still around? How does his name keep coming up in politics sometimes? And it's just, and the fact that like he did pretty well. And I think not in the whichever one came first, the Senate race or the governor's race, he actually did pretty well. And it was very scary and unsettling that how.
Yeah, the governor's race was close, if I remember, because I think it was Edwin Edwards that he was running against. And the joke was, the joke was about Louisiana politics in general, but it's kind of like Edwin Edwards had already been indicted.
That was it. Yeah, he had
already been indicted, and now he was like allowed to come back and run. And people were like, do you want to, vote for the Klansman or the convict? Which one are you?
Okay that was it. Yeah, you're right. I remember reading that in the articles. It's like, and it really is a joke in Louisiana politics. You have the it's so corrupt. It's like you have the corrupt dude or the Klansman.
And I think I remember distinctly, I think it was either the late 80s or early 90s. I remember one of my cousins, when we were living in or staying in Louisiana, had remarked, I guess David Duke had gotten like 3% or 4% of the black vote. And I remember it was like it was yesterday. He saw it. He was like, it's like, shit, did they forget they were free? And I was like, what? Wow. He's like, huh. That 3 or 4%, they must have forgotten that they were free, because there's no way a black person would be voting for a Klansman. There's no way. That's the only way to explain it.
And one of the great things about Louisiana is that they actually on their voter registration, and when it shows up a race, so you can tell like the percentage. Louisiana is interesting because it's one of the few states that do that, so you can actually look at racial politics and see like what percentage of populations voted for whom, and it's some pretty interesting results, to say the least, when you think that certain issues are past us. And it's just like, no, there's still a lot of racists out there who say they're going to vote one way and then go vote another way. Oh man,
a tale as old as time.
Exactly. So today we're going to be talking about Donald's going to talk to us about so the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and the tours, I guess, of plantations that happen in the South. The big one in Louisiana is the Whitney plantation, right? That's the big one. I think in Louisiana.
That's the good one. That's the good one.
That's okay, because I've heard good things about like that tour as like was one of the better ones, but obviously you know a lot more than I do, so I'm gonna let you go ahead and take it over. I know we've talked about United Daughters of the Confederacy. I still don't believe they're actually like physical human beings, but like entities and ghosts that like, I do declare Sherman's Yankee Devils are coming. Like how they're still a thing. But take it away, Donald. Tell us what
oh my gosh, you're gonna make me go way back on this one, because all right, let me just vomit in my mouth a little bit first to get started.
Didn't someone try to burn down their headquarters though during
they did burn it down during in 2020. But all right, for those of you who don't know, the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, is I'm not going to be nice about it. They're a propagandist organization that is bent on, or at least focused on, and has been focused on, recentering the narrative with respect to the Civil War, the antebellum period, the Reconstruction period, and Jim Crow, and then even anything after that. So it's a group of women who are and some men were involved, but it was primarily a group of women that were seeking to push what William Dunning had established as what's known as the lost cause narrative, that, you know, it was a foregone conclusion that the Confederacy was going to lose, but they fought because they felt they had a noble cause in order to face off against the Union. This is also why we have all these grand theories about the Civil War wasn't about slavery, or the Civil War was about states' rights, or the Civil War was about taxation, and any of the other things that have come up is primarily been because of them. So after the war, after Reconstruction, these groups got formed, and they wanted to, I guess, in a sense, memorialize or honor members of the Confederacy, as far as those who had fought. And what they did, and this isn't even the worst thing that they did, but what they did is they paid for the creation of memorials and monuments throughout the country, because I can't say throughout the South because they have chapters everywhere. And they built memorials throughout the country. And in having those memorials, they started the reframing of winners and losers, just causes and unjust causes, and pushing this narrative that those members or those people that were as part of the Confederacy were doing something that was right, doing something that was just, and they sacrificed as part of this. The biggest thing that they did, and that goes bigger than just the statues and the monuments themselves, is the fact that they infiltrated school boards, they infiltrated municipal and county boards to determine what was going to be taught in schools, what types of material was going to be in textbooks, determining the textbooks that are going to be used, controlling the teachers as far as hiring and firing of teachers in schools that are teaching things that they don't want to be taught. Any number of things that they could to ensure that there wasn't going to be racial equity or racial equality. They played a big hand in. So they had a massive control over textbooks, and as far as determining what was going to be in the textbooks and determining the course of action for those textbooks up through the early 90s. And I would say in some areas, probably up until the early 2000s, because they had already laid the groundwork for how things were going to be presented in school books, how things were going, what was going to be omitted, what was going to be included. So you have some textbooks that even recently, I think 5 or 7 years ago, on social media, people had pointed out like what was in the new Texas textbooks, which Texas is problematic because Texas orders the most textbooks, and they then determine, because their relationship with the publishers, what the majority of other states that get books from those publishers are going to get. So in these textbooks, they would have things like the South imported workers from Africa, and it completely takes out language about enslavement, takes out the concept of chattel slavery, the meaning of it, and even an understanding of it, to where it just completely erases the history that was there. And that is part of what they typically did as far as removing themselves as and their predecessors as villains, because they were worried about how that was going to be processed, because you can't argue that you're the good guy or the good person if you are in possession of human beings and then fighting to defend your quote unquote right to own human beings. So there's really no justification for it, but you'll see people even to this day still defending the institution of chattel slavery with I'm certain that they came up with the Irish slave myth. I don't have any proof, but I believe that they were involved in it. But when you start having things like the Irish slave myth, and those who aren't acquainted with it, it's basically the idea that the Irish were brought over in chains as well. They were sold and they were transferred and things like that, without being really honest about the context and the content, because you're talking about indentured servitude. You're not talking about lifelong chattel slavery. You're talking about a system in which you can get out of it legally, either through paying back the debt, working off the debt, whatever it happened to be. And not only that, you also have this idea of, and I'm not going to give anybody credit because I don't want to miscredit the person, but this idea of the path to whiteness. which the Irish, the Italians, a lot of European immigrants had, because in order to be a white person in the 17th century, you're typically just British. And I mean, as far as Welsh, Scottish, and in some cases, some Scots didn't count, but Welsh, Scottish, English, and Benjamin Franklin himself, I think he didn't even want to include Germans, but he wanted to include the French as far as who was considered a white person in America. But by not having whiteness, as far as the Irish, they were able to be exploited in the way they were. But anyway, but going back to the Daughters Confederacy, it's something that they've held on to, I guess, power within the shadows, as far as fundraisers, community organizations, basically having political, I don't even know what you would really call them, but political events. And kind of like in some smaller communities where you have kind of the blessing of the city fathers, you have these women that are going to organize in a certain way to where they ensure that their way of life is not disturbed, whether that's wealth, whether that's status, or whether that is just, the mindset.
So real quick, you talking about that? There's this book. I haven't read it, but it's How the Irish Became White by
Yes.
Noel. Yeah, Noel. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. I don't, because I have a long last name and I hate when people mispronounce it. So I'm not going to try to mispronounce this name. But no, it's like I've talked about that before, and Kai and Mark give me shit about it, about how the Italians, because my grandparents are Italian, I have other Italian family members, like, they came as Italians but then became white, and this assimilation into whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And the proximity to it, and just basically there's that funny meme with Bobby Bacala from The Sopranos, and then Sacco and Benzetti. It's just like your Italian uncle's like, our grandparents didn't, we obeyed the law and we were good citizens, and it's like your Italian anarchist uncle, like the great uncle, stares at you like, what are you talking about? We blew up Wall Street. So it's just like, but yeah, it's I guess my first question in about this, I have seen those Texas it's horrible. Like, it's just like, what? It doesn't make any sense. But then again, it's Texas. But the issue of, and we've talked about this before about the myth of the lost cause on the show, like the whole creating this narrative. It's just like, it seems, it's so weird to me, and I think it's weird to a lot of people, that like the side that lost got to write the history. And it's kind of mind-boggling that it still persists to this day, and you still hear a lot of people talk about this, especially around certain figures like Robert E. Lee, and his officer corps and things like that. But I guess to kind of segue into the next topic, how does the Daughters of the Confederacy, in your opinion, and groups like that, like, set this narrative, and how does it affect, I guess what I'm saying is, like, how important is it to really counter this narrative, and like, what can we do to counter this narrative? Because it's so powerful. And I know in your TED talk, you talked about the importance of the narrative. So like, in your opinion, in what you think as a historian, like, how is that narrative countered, and what can we do? And like, how dangerous, really, I guess, is my main question, this narrative and narratives in general that are misleading.
All right.
I know it's a lot.
I'm trying to think about my words on that one, just so it comes off non-academic elitist, because I've never been that guy, and I don't want to say, well, Foucault says, because as soon as somebody brings up Foucault, I'm like, get out of my face.
No, yes.
Like,
I knew you were going to be great.
I don't give a damn what Foucault says.
Thank you.
Everything for Foucault was a prison. Okay, awesome. That's all we need to know about Foucault. Foucault can fuck off. Anyway, so within history itself, the way I've always described history is, it is a science and an art at the same time. So there's a science with respect to the way that you conduct research, the way that you develop your arguments, things like that. And the art is the way in which you present it, the way you display that content, display that information. So as part of this, you have to do the field work in order to find out what the truth is. So the biggest tool that a a historian has, or anyone who's interested in history, it needs to have is a shovel, because those people that came before you have used a shovel as well. Their shovel might be bigger. So their shovel involved not necessarily digging to the truth, their shovel involved putting dirt over that truth and hiding it. And then they would then tell people what was under the dirt and then prevent them from having the tools to go and then dig up the truth for themselves. So the goal, or at least the duty of any good historian, whatever level you're on, whether you happen to be a student, an academic, retired, hobbyist, whatever, is to take your shovel and not dump dirt on the history that's already there. To actually take that dirt, move it off to the side, and start digging up and trying to figure out exactly what has been going on, what has been buried, and what truth actually exists there. And truth is always one of those questionable terms that people will use, because truth doesn't always mean what we kind of assign it to. It just means, I look at it as it's the information that's there and then deciphering that information. So for people, my suggestion is always this: it's talk to any professionals in those areas. Google is good. I will never say Google is great. Google is good. Google Scholar is okay, but it doesn't replace actually going through a multitude of documents and books, secondary sources, monographs, all that stuff, articles, to actually get the information. The problem with groups like the UDC or the Sons of Confederate Veterans or the Heritage Institute or PragerU or any of these groups, because they're all the same, it's all about limiting your access to the information and then getting you to believe what they have to say about it. Whereas those that I've seen typically on the left, and speaking for people on the left, it's, you need to go and learn this stuff. Here's some tools, here's some things you should read, here's some ideas, here's some people you should know about, as opposed to, I was watching some Prager video where they were talking about Marx, and it was like, this is what Marx believed. And I'm like, I don't know that much about Marx, but that's not what he believed. Oh, and this is what he said about this. I'm like, no, but I see the problem is we've gotten so comfortable with having information handed to us. We sometimes have really shitty sources or sources of information that will then push whatever their perspective on us, on us, that they have about whatever that topic is. So for the UDC, for the Sons of Confederate Veterans, for Heritage, Prager, any of these groups, they don't want people going out and reading about these topics, or reading or going to some of these lectures by any number of people. And I'm got to remember who I just looked at, but any number of historians that are out there that have specialized in this and can have made very compelling arguments, very clear arguments, to where you don't need, like 4 PhDs to understand what the hell they're saying. People like Eric Fauner. I mean, he's a great historian. He makes it very clear, makes it very plain and simple, to where you can understand exactly what's there and what the problem is. And here's the information to back it up. I think that the other thing that's problematic for people is time. Like, you've got to invest. Those groups have had such a great head start in their misinformation campaigns that it's very hard for a lot of people to make back that time. Whether, if K-12 education happens to be the only experience or only exposure that you have to history, and the only other options are like the History Channel, you're not going to learn anything that's going to be beneficial. You're going to learn, forgive me, History Channel, in case there's ever opportunity to work for you, you're going to learn a bunch of bullshit. You're going to learn stuff that, because for the longest time, I mean, this is going off in 10, for the longest time, it seemed like the History Channel just was in love with Hitler. I don't know why, but
Yes.
everything they did was like Hitler and the occult.
It was
Oh,
Hitler.
how could Hitler have won? Oh, here's a counterfactual history where Hitler didn't meet Eva Braun. And then it's like, so it's the woman's fault that why he was killing people. But anyway,
And wait,
Don't
and
forget
now,
the History Channel and aliens.
Yeah, I was
It
about
has to be
to
Hitler and
say.
aliens.
Yeah, and the weird
Well-
mermaid thing they had.
Hitler, aliens, and the mermaid doll that washed up
this
on the
is
beach.
how this is how Hitler and the aliens built the pyramids.
well, first off, Hitler was an alien, so then we can excuse him not being a human.
shit.
He wasn't a human doing this because
There's no
human could
banality
possibly
of
do it.
evil if he's an alien.
Exactly. But yeah,
All right,
it's
Kai, I see what you did there. Eichmann in Jerusalem. I respect. I love it.
Sometimes I have to prove that I still have a brain on this show, okay? Most of the time I'm just ripping the shit out of you. I gotta pull out a reference every once in a while.
but yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Your question about the narrative. And that's what's key is there are a lot of these narratives throughout history that have been subdued or buried to the point where you have a lot of these stories within families. And I will say this, even, something that's come up on TikTok a few times. And I think TikTok is a great place for disseminating information. It's problematic in the sense that your algorithm can keep you not pigeonholed. It can keep you in a shell. It can keep you within a certain zone of protection or cone of protection to where you start getting that echo chamber. And the people that need to hear that content, need to hear that information, might not hear it or might not receive it because they're not on your algorithm, or you're not on their you're not within their For You page. And what is actually done, I've seen it myself, I've seen it with other content creators that are on that app, is it is made available to people who have not been exposed to that information, cognizant of that stuff being out there, to where they're starting to realize, like, oh shit, maybe I didn't learn something in history, or just even this past weekend with Juneteenth, where people were going around and saying things like, well, this is a made up holiday. And I'm thinking to myself, all holidays are made up. Like, what's your point? They're all made up. Every holiday is made up. That's like saying words aren't real. Like, they're not. They're made up too. But just the idea that there are people who are receptive to it and saying, like, oh, here's something new I don't know, I would like to learn more about it, and are taking the opportunity to, do a search or engage with people who may know about that content, and actually asking questions and creating conversation where they now can fill that gap as far as their historical understanding or social understanding or political understanding about whatever it is. And what I did a few years ago, it's weird to think about it being that long ago, because it was 2020. So in February 2020, I gave a TED talk, however we want to say it, about the importance of the narrative. And it started because a conversation that I had with my mom a few years ago, it was around the Trayvon Martin trial. And I say Trayvon Martin trial because even though George Zimmerman was on trial, the press, the prosecution, and the defense made it seem like it was more about Trayvon Martin than anything else, as though this young man was the one who was on trial because because he dared to fight back against someone who was chasing him or following him around. But from my mom's impression, this is somebody who grew up in segregated schools, was one of the first people in her town to desegregate. I think she desegregated when she went to high school, because it was Virginia, and Virginia had shut down a lot of the schools as opposed to integrating. I never got to hear those stories because it was one of those things of, she didn't want to talk about them. A lot of people from her generation didn't want to talk about it because they were taught that's over, it's done, you don't need to revisit this stuff, we need to move past it. Whatever that collective thought was at that time about, we don't need to talk about this because I'm being sold that America is a lot better than it was when I was growing up. And my argument is, it's the same, it's just you're not seeing things done the same way. So I mean, prejudice is still out there, bigotry is still out there, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny is still out there. You're just seeing it manifest in different ways, to where by not talking about people's struggle and not talking about things that have taken place, you end up opening the opportunity for those things to be revisited. Not maybe not but to you or to whatever your group is, your subculture, anything like that. But it's going to be those same tactics that are used over again, which brings me back to the UDC. So the UDC is using all this language about why the books need to be written a certain way and why books don't need to be included here, which goes back to even the foundation of the University of Mississippi. When the university was founded, it was founded as an anti-abolitionist school, or at least links to anti-abolitionism, because the sons of planters, slaveholders, and power brokers in Mississippi were sending their sons to the Northeast. They were sending them to Europe to go to school. And they were starting to fear that abolitionism, as it was increasing, was going to affect them, and it was going to dismantle the system of slavery. So when the University of Mississippi starts, it's all about controlling the curriculum, controlling what classes are going to be taught, who's going to teach them, what books are going to be included, to ensure that abolitionism is not going to take root in the University of Mississippi and in the South. So the Daughters of Confederacy continue that by infiltrating the schools, infiltrating the textbooks. And now you have new groups. Sorry, I shouldn't even say new groups. You've got groups that are the same as the previous groups. They just have nicer names like Patriotic Moms or Moms for Freedom and things like that, where they're doing the exact same thing. So when you see them say, well, we're worried about critical race theory, we can't have that in the school because it's going to make little Timmy, hate himself for being white, which I'm like, why wouldn't your son identify with John Brown? Because if I'm sitting there and I'm not, and if I don't have racist parents, and if I'm not racist, I'm going to see John Brown. I'm like, dang, that dude fucked up some white people over slavery. Holy shit. I'm not going to look at Nathan Bedford Forrest. Now, if your son identifies with Nathan Bedford Forrest or Hitler, we teach World War II. No kids, I shouldn't say that. No parents are worried about their kids sympathizing with Hitler at all. I don't see anybody, when you learn about Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, they're sitting there like, you know what, my son's really going to identify with Pol Pot. My son's really going to identify with Idi Amin. We learn about all these.
I was going to say, my son came home and broke all my glasses because he didn't because Pol Pot didn't like people that wore glasses. It's like my son came home and started breaking everyone's glasses so they couldn't see.
He turned one of his classmates into a Lunchable. The whole Idi Amin.
But go watch Last King of Scotland, everyone, if you haven't seen it. It's a great movie.
But I find that very remarkable that we've got parents that are going on the record saying, I don't want my child to feel guilt over X. Why do you think your child would identify with that person? That's the bigger issue. Because when I see villains throughout history, I don't immediately think, Hitler had a point. He had some ideas. Yeah, he might have gone a little too far, but I look at Hitler as this way. I mean, aside from all the really bad shit that he did, I look at it as like, God damn it. The Nazis had some really cool uniforms. And then I went down a pigeonhole and I was like, oh, that's why the Nazis had really cool uniforms. Hugo Boss was making them. So I'm like, okay, looking at it from a stop, I'm like, holy shit. It's like Hitler had like a cape and he had all this other stuff. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool. It's the Nazis. It's still bad, but holy shit, those guys knew how to dress. They really knew how to dress. And you guys were putting pink triangles on people and putting them in the camps. Come on. There's a little projection going on here, Adolf.
It's
There's
camp.
a little self-hate.
That's the word we call that, is camp.
It's camp.
Yes.
And then there's that picture of him with those shorts, those like super short, those like the lederhosen and whatever he's wearing.
I completely blocked out that photo. I've seen way too much World War II stuff over the years,
because we all watched the History Channel when it was on,
and we all had football coaches who were teaching history, and they're like,
and the football coach is probably like, that Hitler guy kind of had some good ideas, and it's just like, oh god, that's just like one real quick, like having gone to school in the South, and then I want to well, when you're done, Don, I want to pivot because I want to bring up probably one of our better episodes with with Kai did on the residential schools and the idea of the narrative. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
it was Kai. It was a very good episode.
You're just gonna bring everybody down again.
I got it, but that's why
That's the most depressing episode we've ever done.
God, it was. But I totally forgot what I was gonna say. Oh no, you hear this this conservative myth of like the liberal socialist professors, the Marxist professors that are gonna indoctrinate your kids at college. I'm like, I have a bachelor's in political science. I have a master's in political science. Most of my professors were Republicans. I don't know about anyone else. I think I had one professor that might have voted for Bernie in the primaries and then just pivoted hard to Joe Biden. Maybe another one that probably like some other ones that were like, moderately liberal, like, stuff that you'd probably watch, like who's the most conservative person on MSNBC? Like what not Keith Oatman, Joe Scarborough, who's the Republican, became Democrat.
Right.
But this idea that like, I tell people, it's like, where are these Marxist professors? Where are these Marxist, socialist, atheist, liberal professors that are going to indoctrinate me? Because that's the university I want to go to. Because I'm really sick and tired of having to deal with Republicans in class. Like, just to be honest, like I've heard that narrative my entire life. I would love to have a liberal, Marxist, atheist, socialist professor that's going to rot my brain. Great, please. I'll gladly take out student loans to go to that person's class.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was part of that whole PragerU thing I was watching, because it was like, oh, once you start digging, and they were like digging to the core of Marxism, right? So they had their cool little animation, and it was like, it starts with justice studies and ethnic studies, then you keep going, and then it's gender and diverse, and every campus has a diversity, equality, or diversity, equity, and inclusion office. And right then underneath that, you get to the core of Marxism. Like, you guys are taking Marxism in the sense of collegiate studies and applying it to Marx, when those two things are not the same. When you're talking about Marx, like a Marxist approach to history is talking about class, race, identity. You're not teaching people to be Marxists. Wouldn't be bad, because in all honesty, if I'm looking at it and I'm saying, this is the way that history, or at least the positioning, when you look at people, not Rodiger, what was his name? Oh my gosh. You have some professors that started off saying things like bringing in class, bringing in race, bringing ethnicity, bringing identity into their cultural historical examinations. And that then became labeled as the Marxist approach. In no way are people teaching Marxism. I mean, in all honesty, the way that with all these think tanks, with all these propaganda units that happen to be on college campuses, and in fact, I want to give you the correct name of what the right-wing group is on this campus at the University of Mississippi.
We had the Students for Liberty at my undergrad. They were like the libertarians. They got John Stossel to come speak. It was absolutely horrible.
Well, this one is the Institute for Independence, Freedom, and something. It's like one of those weird things where you're like, Nazis. Those are clearly Nazis.
The Institute for, was it Independence? What is it?
It was something like the Institute for Freedom and something else.
That just sounds white. It's like the last part should be "and whiteness." Oh man.
Here, let me pull it up right now.
But the Koch brothers like took over our economics department too, in the business department, just started teaching all that nonsense. And then we had the Students for Liberty, and they actually kind of, I think, outnumbered like campus Republicans. Like, they were just so obnoxious. And I remember them getting John Stossel to come speak, and he had a stupid sign like, "No, they can't. The government can't do this." And then I remember he brought up, he had a PowerPoint right in this auditorium, and he brought it up, and he was like, "See, poverty was going down before Lyndon Johnson in the Great Society or whatever, and then it like plummeted. Poverty plummeted under Johnson, and it like kind of like stayed like level at this really low percentage." And I'm just like, so what you're telling me is like Johnson's programs worked? Like, why are you saying it was bad when poverty was up here And it was trickling down, but then Johnson comes in, it just like crashes and just like kind of bottoms out at a very low percentage. And it's like, so what are you trying to say, John Stossel? Like that, the government did kind of step in and solve some issues of poverty and made life better for a lot of people, and you're just a jackass who should have stayed on 2020.
Here's the name of it. You ready? And again, I'm not worried about them having a problem with me because they have no connection. I'm not a faculty member. And I have academic freedom, and I can talk shit about them all I want. Now, tell me this does not sound like some fascist nonsense. And I'll get back to your question about the Marxist professors thing. The Declaration of an Independent Center for the Study of American Freedom.
I hate it. I hate it on sight. That sounds like the kind of people that I will be crossing the street to get away from.
Who came up with that? They wear Hugo Boss still. They definitely wear Hugo Boss.
Unironically.
Unironically wear Hugo
No,
Boss.
what they wear is they wear Hugo Boss. That's what they wear. I don't understand why you don't like what we're wearing. I mean, what we're wearing is very fashionable. It's fashion forward. Forward. March.
Also, they have this like weird fixation on like the what is it called? The guy who wrote that book, American Marxist, called it the Franklin School, and his editors missed it. But it's the Frankfurt School, talking about like postmodernism and they quote unquote what they call cultural Marxism, which is just an anti-Semitic revamp of cultural Bolshevism. They love that shit. They're just like, it's gonna poison you. But it's just like, I don't. Where are these professors at? I want to be poisoned.
And I've never had any.
I want to be poisoned. Where are they?
I've had professors as far as when I went to Georgia Southern for my undergrad and my grad, when I went to Arizona State, and now at the University of Mississippi. I would say I've had a fair number of conservative and moderate professors. I have never once had a majority of my professors during a semester, majority of my professors who are like outright far left, whatever term that they want to use as far as these, people like the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom, whatever people like that want to use, because these have all been people that I've had respect for. My conservative professors, I've had respect for my moderate professors, because for the most part, none of them brought their politics in the classroom. And I've had some of my students find me on TikTok, and I think I did a live, or I did one of my videos, and I was basically saying like, no one at any level I was ever teaching knew my politics. And a couple of my students jumped in. I saw it and was like, I said, did I honestly answer? Could you ever tell? And they're like, we still don't know. I'm like, that's, I mean, maybe I'm that sheep in wolf's clothing, and I'm trying to hide, my Ushanka so that they don't know. I mean,
you're indoctrinating the youth.
There may or may not be one right over my computer. Who's to say? There may be one. There might be a picture of Che Guevara right next to my desk, and there might be one of these things. This book by Engels. I mean, I might have some of that stuff here, but I also have other stuff around. So, it's one of those things that the whole thing of having these far leftist professors, or that's just more scare tactics out of, I would even just link it to just the Reagan era. I would just say that's just the Cold War mindset, brainwashing of like, oh, that's what's going to happen when you go to college. Here's what happens when you go to college. Okay. You may experiment sexually. Okay. You might try some drugs. You might drink. You might sleep in late because you thought, oh shit, I can manage an 8 a.m. class. I got up at 6 o'clock every day for high school to go to school at 7 o'clock. I should have no problem going to school at 8 a.m. So you end up sleeping in and missing classes. Okay. You meet new people. That's the scariest part. You meet new people that you otherwise would have never met. The people that are most likely to radicalize you, that are going to radicalize you according to people like Prager and Heritage and all these other groups. and the Department of Independent Center for the Study of American Freedom, the groups that are going to indoctrinate your kids or radicalize your kids or whatever are going to be the new people that they meet, because they're meeting people from different parts of the country, people from different religious backgrounds than them, people of different races, people of different gender identities, sexual orientations. And what I've seen in my experience of, especially when I went to a school in a small Southern town, and so small to the point where when school was in session, the population quadrupled. Like, that's how small the town was. So you've got people that are coming in all around the country. You've got international students that are coming in as well. And you're getting to see different perspectives of humanity, different people, getting exposure to different things out there, to where if you happen to be somebody who's coming from, small suburban area or small town America, and now you're seeing people that, oh shit, you're the people that my parents said I'm supposed to be afraid of. And then you realize, oh my God, you're a human being just like me. Oh my gosh, there's really nothing wrong with you. That's what groups like the Declaration of Independent Center for the Study of American Freedom are worried about, because it means it's going to cut into the bullshit that they're selling, which is poor kids that are able to go to school now because of school loans, which need to be abolished, and school needs to be free anyway. The poor kids that are able to go, if groups like this have their way, those poor kids are not going to be able to go. The working class kids are not going to be able to go to school. The middle class kids are going to struggle to go, and the upper class kids are going to be just fine. So for them, it's about shifting it back to where we were in the 50s and 60s, to where you, in order to not go into the war, whether we're talking about Korea, whether we're talking about Vietnam, oh, you got to go to college. And the only way that you were really able to go to college is if your family had the money to do it. So typically, when you were done with high school, you were done, unless you were planning on going to a career that required you to have a college degree. But yeah, those leftist professors, I mean, even Berkeley struggles to have leftist professors, because academia is a hierarchical structure. Just like you can say, like, there are rich people who are liberal. Okay. There are billionaires who, I don't know of any liberal billionaires. I know they're all, as far as I'm concerned, they're all conservative, because there's no way that you become a billionaire by, I hate to get controversial here. There's no way that you become a billionaire through ethical practices that involve taking care of other human beings. So there's no way. Or as I like to call it, wage theft, because if you got that much excess profit, it means that has been coming out of somebody's pocket. And guess what? It ain't the dude that's coming across the border. I'm sorry. I think I just showed my political leanings on that.
Well, we are a Republican podcast, so we're gonna have to say goodbye. Unfortunately, we are funded by the Declaration of Independence of Whiteness, or whatever the fuck you just said.
I just realized that organization name at your campus sounds like one of those like bot made t-shirts that are on Facebook. Like, you just put enough right-wing words in and somebody's going to buy the t-shirt. It sounds like that. And it's going to have a terrible like clip art image of like the Declaration of Independence on it. Or not even that, just like a scroll
Slap
and that.
eagle. Eagle in 1776 on it, and then there you go.
Oh, by the way, if anyone, and this has been kind of my statement on, you'll know I was kidnapped. If you ever see me wearing like a 1776 or 76 or Betsy Ross thing, or any flag stuff for that matter, you're like, oh shit, what happened to him? I'm like, help me.
He's signaling.
I'm fine. Don't worry about it. It's okay. It's like, help me. I'm fine. Don't worry. That's when you'll know that something's going on, because if I'm wearing that type of shit, either that or I'm on a grift. Like if tomorrow the Republican Party came to me and they're like, oh yeah, Wicker is stepping down and we need somebody to take his place. I'm like, you need somebody to take his place? It's like, yeah, you'd be perfect. I'm like, yeah, I would be perfect. You guys know my politics at all? It's like, well, you're blacker in the South and you're a veteran and you did this and did this. And I was like, all right. Next day, landslide victory for me. Landslide. And then
I'm sorry, once this episode comes out, you're not getting that offer anymore.
Marxist, communist, socialist, future professor indoctrinates youth in
He was
podcasts.
talking shit about the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom.
I just want all the listeners to know that every time he quotes this group, he has to look over at his screen.
It's such a stupid name.
It's so fucking stupid.
And the thing
Oh
is, they
my
think
God.
that this is like, oh my God, proves I'm an American by saying, no, it doesn't. It proves that you're stupid. That's what it.
Yes.
It proves that and speaking of stupid, we had Charlie Kirk and his minions come out here a couple of years ago,
Oh God.
and they couldn't get on campus. And this tells you how much they lie about stuff. We weren't allowed on campus. You didn't request to be on campus. Like, you went to a ballroom off campus, and when someone asked about why you weren't on campus, like, we weren't allowed to be on campus. I'm like, well, one, you either did not request, because the university has all types of speakers that come to the University of Mississippi. You either didn't request it, or you requested it way too late to actually come onto campus and hold your event, because they have to account for anything that's going to be taking place. They have to get you security, they have to get you AV, they have to get you all this stuff. And if you don't do it in time, it ain't happening. You weren't kicked off or prevented from being on campus. I mean, whatever they want to do to grift all these people out of money, and that's between them.
You just said
Unless
his
they
name,
want
I
me to
just
run,
cringed.
then
What there's a YouTube thing. It's like a fake political ad. One of those like College Humor, I think, put it out, and he was just like, I'm Gil Fortbright, but if you pay me enough, I'll be Philip Dilbright. I'll be Philip
Yeah.
Mumforfarts. It doesn't matter. You call me whatever. But you mentioned, so you just to kind of segue into the plantation tours and the slavery
Yes.
tours. One of the, like, I will admit, Kyle, I'm gonna put you on the spot. One of the better episodes, obviously, was Kai's episode on the residential schools. And one of the things, Kyle, I'll tell you this publicly, one of the things that really hit me hard, but that episode was depressing as fuck, like, already. But one of the things that really hit me was when, and it kind of reminded me of what Donald, what you talked about in your TED talk, is Kai, when you mentioned that, like, I believe it was you had uncles or great uncles that had to go to those residential schools, and then they never talked about it. Like, when they brought it up, like, they shut down. And I
Yeah.
can't even, like, we all talked about, we can't even imagine like the horrors that they saw. And Donna, it reminded me about what you said about you talking to your mother, and then you talking to other family members and hearing these stories, and you're like, why didn't I ever hear these stories?
Mhm.
Because, and, like, this prevailing narrative of settler America and the mythology of it, and this whole notion of like freedom and democracy and liberty, and the shovel analogy, the shovel metaphor was great. It's just like the whole truth is buried, and it takes people to talk about this, to bring up the fact that these horrible things happen.
Mhm.
It's crazy. Like, there was, like, Mark, there was one time you told me you told a story. I don't know if it was on here, if it was me, but you would tell you, like, your grandmother had to pass as Italian in the South, so
Yeah.
she'd be considered
Yeah.
white. Like, it's, people don't understand, like it's, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, and I even though I have olive oil in my mayonnaise, like, I'm still a white man. But, like, these things that y'all bring up is it's so powerful, and I wanted to propose to you three, because I'm the only one here that doesn't come from people who have been marginalized at some point, or still are marginalized. Like, what do y'all think about, like, how the importance of these alternative, I know I probably said this before in some way, but, like, just to segue into the slavery tours, because this seems like a new, I didn't know about these plantation tours until like 2 or 3 years ago. But, like, what do y'all, I guess, y'all's thoughts about these narratives that are set by people who look like me, and, like, and how important it is for the narratives of people who come from y'all's backgrounds to break and destroy my narrative?
Well,
Well-
something I okay, rock paper scissors.
Just talk, Mark.
I notice that a lot of the time, if it's not a marginalized group's pain, it has a really hard time traditionally catching people's attention. It's like almost if it's like people want to be like, oh, these poor people were subjected to so much, and like it's important to know how people were wronged, how they're continued to be wronged, but there's only so much trauma that people can relive and retell. And especially I think since this has come from me and I'm like 2-3 times removed from it, the things that happened to my great grandmother, who had to disguise her children in that way, whose midwife didn't speak English, who delivered my grandmother. She only spoke Choctaw. She refused to learn English. And my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, was a victim of police brutality because he's Native American. And none of these things will really happen to me. And I feel like all these things is just like retelling someone else's pain. But there's so much more to people's identity and culture than pain. And it's almost like up until recently, I guess, I don't know if it's because how accessible it is through the internet, it seems like only recently positive or like bittersweet aspects of people's culture are able to be told firsthand, whether it's someone sitting down with their grandmother who can barely speak whatever language they're assimilated into, retelling something she did as a child, or if it's like someone who's living like those people, like indigenous people who live in different parts of the world, being like, yes, this is what we eat on a day-to-day basis. It's not always like you don't need to package up things to sell them to people. It's okay to be authentic and not have to make everything so cold and museum-like when you're talking about people who, like, they haven't gone extinct, they're still there. It doesn't need to be treated as a graveyard for something that's still going on, if that makes sense.
If you look at just like the episodes that I've done on this show, the ones that stick with people are the ones that are really depressing and painful, and like spoilers, I guess, at some point in the next couple months, we're going to be producing a Trail of Tears episode, and that's going to be very, very depressing. Again, it's going to be a story of pain, of heartbreak, of death and destruction and everything bad. And I have to say that when I produce these episodes, and it's not only, I haven't only done this work through this show, I've also done some work with public school system back in Florida when Native American History Month is going on. I've done programs for schools like that as well. And they would tell me, oh, we're doing a unit on like westward expansion and things like that. And none of that is going to be good stories. Like there's the one battle at the victory at Greasy Grass, or Little Bighorn for anybody else who doesn't know the term. But like there's that one bright spark, and everything else is going to be painful. And even though I'm not the one who's living through those times, because I am seen as an authentic source to go to for those, and I would rather be the authentic source than to outsource it to somebody else who is not going to tell the history correctly and with sympathy and with empathy, all three combined. That puts a major amount of pressure on me. And I've told these guys that, like, when I've had to do these episodes for the 2 weeks coming up to it, I am not going to be fun to be around, because I'm having to live through the trauma of people that I recognize. And that's kind of one of the things that especially white narratives don't really hold on to. It's who you identify with. And when it comes to a colonizer, a settler, a white people, descendants of those people kind of narrative, is that they never see the people as people they recognize. Like if when I hear about just a short trigger warning for the next 30 seconds, when I hear about like the Sand Creek massacre where they would take babies and bash their heads against the rocks, I can only picture my cousins, because that's what those babies would have looked like. So it's a true double-edged sword that I am seen as the authentic source to come to, and I would rather it be me than somebody else who couldn't handle it truthfully. But it's reliving like these for some people it's reliving an actual trauma that they've been through, and for others it's reliving these echoes of trauma as you go through all of these things. And I can only assume that if you are a person who's working in these slave tours or something like that, if you're coming from recognizing those people as your own people, that it's going to be a source of trauma, and it's going to be a source of contention when you have people coming to these events, coming to these places and wanting to argue with you or wanting to pretend that they know something that you don't. That's something that I've dealt with my entire life, because I've been a quote unquote a public Indian my entire life. My family has always been in education, in shows and things like that, and being the public blank puts you on the spot for everybody who's been taught this information and holds on to it with all the strength of knowing that their place on that land, their place in that neighborhood, their place in that societal bracket relies on them still kicking you down. Because if they let go of that for a second, then they realize that everything they've got has come from somebody else's blood. I don't really know how else to say that, and it's still something that I'm going to continue. Like, I have stayed on this show because this information doesn't get out in other ways. I'm reaching an audience who would not even know to look for that kind of information. So the narrative is a double-edged sword in this situation, and it's the only way that I can go on.
See, that's going to be hard to follow, both because it reiterates what many of the issues are, because you're talking about histories that have been overlooked, whether we're talking about as far as marginalized peoples, whether we're talking about indigenous history, African American history, Hispanic history, Latino history, Asian history, because their stories have often been treated as though secondary or tertiary or even beyond, as far as like it's background, or it's something that you can include as, you know, I don't know, as an elective course, as opposed to as being included in the main course itself. And myself, as far as leading the tours, because one of the duties I have here is as an assistantship, but then also as part of public history here with the university, or at least organizations with the university, is leading tours about the history of slavery and the contextualization of slavery with the university's history. And when I was initially approached about it, I wanted to say no. Like, I wanted to say hard no, hard pass. I don't want this, because it's going to be too much. This is going to be too mentally fatiguing, emotionally fatiguing, spiritually fatiguing, because I knew what it was going to entail. Or at least I thought I knew what it was going to entail, which was, oh, you know, here's some history about slavery, here's some history about slavery, here's some history about slavery, here's some history about slavery here. And what I ended up finding, and the reason why I've stayed with it, is the lessons that have been there, the content that has been there has been so fulfilling in being able to teach other people about the injustices that took place on campus that no one talked about. And in some cases, or in many cases, no one knew about until about 2013. Now, the tours themselves have been given on a regular basis since 2019, primarily from me giving those tours, and they involve talking about the foundation of the university. They involve physical evidence of enslaved people being on campus, like their finger impressions in the bricks from when they were being first made. And these things were in plain sight, and people just walk by them every day. These buildings have been here since the antebellum period, and there were people who worked on this campus for decades and never knew that stuff was there. Um, Now, to add on what Kai and what Mark were saying, the idea is you want people to know what is taking place. You want people to understand what is taking place. And the fear is always like, oh, what pushback am I going to have from this person who doesn't want to hear about it, doesn't want to talk about it, or has the perspective of, that was so long ago. I was even approached by one of my advisors, one of the members of the committee, that said, are you worried about the media? And I kind of had a question on my face, was kind of like, what do you mean? And he was approaching it and saying that, with all the dust up, all the miscommunication, all the misunderstanding about things like CRT, are you concerned about someone coming here and having, I don't know, just having an issue with this being taught? And I frankly, it was over Zoom, but I would have done the same thing in person. I told him, like, I really don't care what anybody like that thinks, because that's not the person I'm serving. That person's already coming here with ulterior motives, as far as like, they don't want to participate, they don't want to learn, they don't care. And I look at it as this way: if that's the case, just enjoy the walk. I mean, because it's a walking tour. I'm like, just enjoy the walk. And hopefully for you, it's an unpleasant day, because I'm going to have a good day doing this tour no matter what. But that's one of the things that you run into, whenever we're talking about any type of marginalized people's history, and anything that has to deal with injustices that were done, whether it happen to be violent, with respect to economics, with respect to political rights, anything like that. It's this fear that so many people, I shouldn't say so many people, it's this fear that you're going to have people that you come into contact with that, one, don't care about this, two, don't see the necessity in it, and then three, just don't appreciate what was taking place, because they don't understand what was taking place, and what land they're on, and in a lot of cases, what experiences people had. And to piggyback off of Kai, there are a lot of times, like, I do the tours or I do lectures and things like that, and I honestly have to put myself in that person's feet, in those shoes initially, but then I sometimes have to remove myself from it, because it can be too much. One of those times where it was too much was, I brought my daughter on a tour when I was just doing like a video tour to record, to do a digital version of the tour. And just out of curiosity, I had her put her fingers in the finger impressions on the bricks. And then it should have dawned on me, and it should have dawned on a lot of historians prior to that, but just how deep the institution of slavery was, to the point that when my daughter put her fingers in those impressions in the bricks, she was 5 at the time, her fingers fit perfectly. And just to get hit hard at that moment, where you're kind of like, holy shit, these sons of bitches had children out here working. It's bad enough you had adults that were property, or seen as property, that were part of the chattel slavery system, but you had children doing all this manual labor as well. And there are people who are willing to excuse it or erase it. And the same thing with indigenous history, same thing with immigration history, same thing with any type of marginalized people that are here and have had a story, but have not had their stories included in the main story. It's long overdue, and it's just one of those things that, this isn't against you, Nelson, but I mean, you made that comment earlier about telling from your perspective. It's that idea of so many people are worried about, or at least from my experience, so this will mainly be anecdotal, I've run into a good number of people that are more worried about it needs to be palatable to them as far as the mainstream audience, as opposed to, we really need to hear Black, brown, indigenous, Asian voices. We need to hear queer voices telling these stories, as opposed to, cishet men that are telling these stories, cishet white men that are telling these stories primarily. Because when you start talking about history, there's definitely a different impression that you get when you're talking to somebody of that background who's telling that story and giving you their impressions of what took place, what happened, and why that story is important, as opposed to someone who you don't see them as connected to it, and like, why the hell should I care? You look like me, but you don't look like the people that we're talking about. So it just seems like you're almost living vicariously through their history.
When we did our episode on the Seminole Wars, I remember I went to interview my uncle, who is himself Muskogee. He's married to a Seminole woman, and he is an academic of top tiers when it comes to this this kind of thing, especially in their own communities. The rest of my family are not Muskogee and Seminole. He's adopted, and that's family. But I interviewed him, asking him specifically, I wanted to interview him because I could do all the research that I wanted to online, through books, all these things. But I wanted to ask him because I wanted to know what stories were told within those family groups. And that was the most important part of that to me. And I spent a couple hours on Zoom with him, and just for a little color on this, they live on an eco settlement that is as close to traditional living as possible. They live just about an hour north of where Nelson lives. And they have buffalo. They harvest their own plants that are native to the area. It's an immersion language school, because up until recently, my uncle was one of the last 5 fluent Muskogee speakers in the world. So it's a immersion language school for all the kids there. And I've been told in no uncertain terms that if I go to visit them, that if I have to speak English, because I don't know I know like 3 words in Muskogee. If I have to speak English, I have to whisper it to my uncle first before anything else, so that it can be, discussed like that. And then the immersion school can continue. But I remember talking to him, and when I asked him, how do you want to be credited for this information while I'm doing a presentation, he says, oh, you don't have to credit me, because I know that you're going to tell this right. And that is it's a heavy burden, as in wearing a cape made of diamonds. Like, that is the best compliment that you can be told when you're doing this kind of work. Because even though I'm not myself Seminole or Muskogee, my blood family has never told stories about this war, or any of our family members had any stories told through their extended family. And just the simple fact that I went to him and I said, what do you know about these? What stories have you been telling between yourselves? What are the books going to be missing? Because these books are mostly written by people who come into camp one day, talk to them, write down things and through their own usually colonial lens, and then leave afterwards without understanding that there's going to be so much of this narrative that's not told, because it has to be passed kind of through the type of language that's being spoken, and through the connotations of the words that they're using, that if you're missing so much context from this if you don't ask people who've been told this through their own communities. And being in that situation again is it's a very heavy thing to hold. But I would say to anybody who wants to connect with narratives like the one that Donald is telling on his campus, or the one that I'm telling through my family and through Indigenous history, or through anybody who comes through the show, or anybody that wants to connect with those things, a lot of us are still here. a lot of us have stories that can be passed word of mouth, and that's kind of the problem with what you mentioned earlier, Donald, that a lot of older generations were sold that you don't talk about the hard parts of this, and you just got to kind of hope that somebody is willing to, because the only party that's being served by not talking about the hard parts of our history are the ones who are in power. And if we can convince our older generations, and if we can continue that work for the generations coming after us, then that is one of the most powerful things that you can have. And don't always rely on academia. Make sure that you're checking who the authors are of things. Make sure that you're checking where this information is coming from. Because even just recently, I went to a museum where they had Powhatan's mantle. It was a gift given from Powhatan to the English king at Jamestown, and they had information around it, and it said that we think that these are deer and that these things mean villages and everything. And the first thing that I thought was, look at where this information is coming from. And this information was coming from 2017, where they only talked to academics in the universities around there. They did not talk to any of the indigenous people around there. And even though I am not myself Algonquin or of any of those groups around there, I would say, of course, those are deer. Of course they are, because I'm coming from a similar narrative, a similar art style, a similar way of using these symbols to mean ideas that you don't like. I can't believe in 2017 they're still not talking to indigenous people about an indigenous artifact and saying, well, we think these are deer, rather than horned serpents or something like that. You know, you can just talk to us, we're still here. And when it comes to the shovel metaphor, I think that's brilliant. And the one thing that I would add to it is that sometimes it's not just things that are under that dirt, it's people. There's living people under there who can still give you this information.
Yeah, and when you're talking about it as far as who to go to and things like that, you immediately made me think about the Wpa slave narratives, because kind of like with the to go back to those spawns of Satan, the UDC, they were so heavily wrapped up in telling their narrative that people who had been buried, you know, as far as metaphorically speaking, because they were still alive, but the stories had been buried. These people were still alive who had unfortunately had been enslaved, or their parents had been enslaved, and they still had those stories, and they hadn't talked to anybody about what had taken place, because no one came to ask them. No one came to ask them until the WPA project to go and research these people. And one of the biggest mistakes that took place was that the government sent white students, primarily white students and journalists, to go record these stories. So you're talking to a lot of Black people in the Jim Crow South that, again, are concerned about, if I tell the truth, am I going to get in trouble? So you had some of these stories like, oh yeah, it wasn't that bad, you know, this happened and this happened, this happened. But then you had some people that were in their 90s and like, I don't give a shit. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, because I'm going to die soon, and if I meet Jesus, I don't want to be a liar, and you know, and all these. And I'm reading through this stuff, and it was written the way that they spoke. And you had people said like, no, this guy here who owned my family owned me. I was 6 years old before emancipation came, blah blah blah, and he owned our family, and he killed these people, and he raped these people, he did this, and then after the war he got all of his land back, and we ended up having a sharecrop on his land, but he's dead now, so I can talk about it. So you have all these stories that would have been potentially missed if not for, hey, we need to give somebody a job, go out here and interview people. And the thing is that so much of that stuff is, I would argue, is still needed today, because there are a lot of people who lived through the civil rights movement, who lived through that era, lived through desegregation, school busing, you know, all that stuff, and have not had their stories recorded, have not had anybody talk to them, because they quote unquote weren't important enough. They weren't the MLKs, they weren't the Malcolm X's, they weren't, you know, the I would say Fred Hampton, but he didn't even get his story told. But they were not the individuals that really got to have a say in what took place in their lives. And they doubly don't get a say in what gets remembered about them. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things where we need to be better collectively, need to be better about getting these people's stories, because there's stuff in the archives that we can go and grab, but even then you got to know what you're looking for when you go into an archive, because it's not laid out for you. And unfortunately, I mean, a lot of people just don't have the time, they don't have the training to go into the archives and go through that stuff. And in some cases, you don't have the money to pay to go to archives, because there's one I love to use in San Diego, and it's $90 a session. So if you go in there for 4 hours, you're paying $90 if you're part of the public, but you're paying $45 if you're an academic to go, because I guess it's easier for us to go in there because we know what we're looking for, when the truth is we don't know what the hell we're looking for. But yeah, I agree with, well, again, agree with everything the two of you said, because it's not just necessary to go back and get those stories. I think it is disservice for us not to have those stories available, accessible, because not only would you have a story that's not included, but in the case of what you're talking about, the Powhatan artifacts, you're going to have stuff that's going to be misrecorded because it's somebody who thinks that they know, but they haven't necessarily conversed with anybody from that background to really get an understanding of what in fact it is.
That was wonderful, y'all. I enjoyed listening to that. How ever sad it was, and it was beautiful. I feel worse as a white man now, so glad. I know that's the point of this.
Didn't you listen to anything he said? Quit taking the narrative of the people that are doing the oppressing.
Hey,
You cannot talk here.
There was a one time where Italians.
God love you, Nelson.
I know that was great, y'all. That was wonderful. I think our listeners are going to enjoy that, but that was definitely great. It made me think a lot, and not about certain events that happened to Italian Americans, but that happened to actual marginalized people. I guess to wrap things up real quick, not real quick. We have take as much time as you want. It's whatever. I enjoy the podcast. We all enjoy it. So, you're an author. So tell us about the books that you have out.
Oh, Jesus.
Why that specific? just real quick, like it's because you do history, but then like you write. Well, Kai read the books, and then she told us about it, because I don't know how to read, so Kai had to tell me what the books are about. It seems like it's kind of like mystery horror, but there's like history, like there's history also kind of sprinkled in. It was like we all agreed that the second book should be a Jordan Peele movie, 100%.
Oh, I agree.
The one about the haunted plantation would be absolutely beautiful.
All right, you are the second. No, you might be the first official interview about this book, or at least related to this book.
Hey, breaking! This is breaking, y'all. An exclusive from the author. You heard it first on Dixieland the Proletariat. Yes,
you did hear it first. All right. So since we're coming up on a year of me releasing that book, because August would be a full year, that book came about. I'm speaking of Magnolia Lane, and I don't have any copies, or else I would show one up here. Oh no, I do have one. This is Magnolia Lane. So that came as a result of me being very pissed off at finding out about plantation weddings and plantation tours, for the purpose of, oh, look over here, the people dressed up in the Southern Belle, and I'm sitting there like, that shit didn't happen.
Wearing white culture.
The Southern Belle stuff is not true. That is UDC bullshit.
Wearing white culture just plantation.
Nelson, it's live, laugh, love. Don't even bother going through it.
Or it's right on the axis. It's right there, right in the...
No, if you have money to have a plantation wedding, then you're not going to be in... Oh, it could be golf. It could be live, laugh, love / golf.
It's that intersection of golf and live, laugh, love. You're right. You're right.
No, you're both wrong. All three of you are wrong, actually. Not both. Because it's all four. Because you cannot tell me. You cannot tell, and I'm going to let Golden Corral off easily.
Oh, okay.
That's the least one that this part of. But Golden Corral, that would be the ones that want to have it there but can't afford it. Okay.
Yes. I can see the point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's like, oh, that'd be so beautiful. We could do this, right? So, but then the other was, it is definitely kissing the dog in the mouth, because when you start looking at that L of live, laugh, love, kissing dog in the mouth, and then the golf thing, it's the golf as far as being able to afford it, right? Golf culture. The live, laugh, love as far as like the whole out of sight, out of mind. These really aren't big problems. Blah blah blah. You know, this is the way it is, and or the head in the clouds thing of like it's really not that big of a problem. And then the kissing the dog in the mouth, because those are the same individuals that, and I'm speaking from experience, so again, anecdotally, these are people that I knew had no problem kissing their dogs in the mouth, but they had a problem with having people in their family or their daughters dating certain people.
Shit.
So
I'm gonna have to find a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio and Django and put that right in the middle. Like and it all intersects Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Django Unchained.
well, I don't know. Calvin Candy was down with
Oh yeah.
he was down with it. And I'm pretty sure he was having sex with his sister too, because that whole relationship was, everything that was going on was questionable. But no, it started because I was like, I can't remember what I watched. I knew it existed, but I think it was a friend of mine from high school or someone I knew had gone to one. And I'm just thinking like, fuck everybody in this picture. I hope you all die. I hope the enslaved people, I hope this turns into like Tales from the Hood. And I hope like the little slave dolls that happen to be on that land attack and kill all of you, right? So I'm like, all right, cool. How can I play with this? So I started thinking, drafting the story. I started the story probably like 4 years ago. And I could never finish it because it was like, I'm not mad enough to finish this. I'm not in the right mindset to finish this. And I was listening to this one historian. He said, history should never come from a place of revenge. And I was thinking like, but that's where my historical fiction comes from. It comes from this sense of revenge, whether it's like people lying, people hiding truths, people doing despicable shit. So I started off with some history that had taken place. I just, mixed some stuff in, mixed some fiction in, and then had fun with it, which involved some people going on a tour. Some were going with the right intentions, some weren't. And as a result, a lot of them didn't make it out of the house.
Or if they did, they didn't make it off the property.
Well, yeah.
I described, so I'm not gonna spoil anything for listeners, so you have to go get the book. But I did tell my co-host about every single death that was in that book, and like what order they came in and how it happened and everything.
I had to laugh because my mom was the first review that I paid attention to, because she called me, and she's read all my stuff, and she called me and she was like, I need to talk to you about your book. And I was like, oh shit. And I'm thinking, because my dad would go like, I cried, I finished it and I was crying, with any of the books that he was like, I just started crying because I was so proud. I love the story that did this. Oh, and I love that this happened. So my thing is like, holy shit, my dad's crying to stuff that I'm writing. So I'm like, I'm really gonna fuck him up next book. So anyway, my mom, and I'm like, all right. So my mom is not that same personality. I'm like, well, what are you? I said, what's going on? She's like, and I'm like, oh shit, that sounds like I'm disappointed. So she takes a deep sigh, and I'm like, Mom, what is it? She's like, why did you do all that stuff to those people in that book? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, why did you do that to them? They didn't need to. I said, yes, they did. Did you read the book? They needed that to happen to them. She's like, I just don't like that had to happen, especially when this happened. I was like, that was my favorite one. And she's like, why? I was like, think about who it reminds you of. She's like, I can't think of. I said, think very hard about who it might remind you of, and you'll figure out who it is and why they had to die that way. And then she's like, oh, okay, I get it. Well, I understand. And that was kind of like the end of the conversation. But yeah, I think Kai knows who I'm thinking about, because it's the one person that you hate from the very first line.
Yeah. I was like, you are not going to let this person live, because they last a long time, and there's no way you could have written them like this and let them live at the end. It would have been too heartbreaking.
You know, when I was writing it, when I was writing it, and I was thinking to myself, like, this is gonna piss off so many people because this person's still alive. And I kept going. And then you're like, oh shit, we're almost at the end of the book. And then you're like, oh shit, that's funny.
And I just want to clarify something again without any spoilers. That particular death was or was not written as a supernatural death.
Ooh.
I will just say a little bit of both. Let's just say that something took advantage of what was there.
Right. Okay. Because I was thinking, like, when I got to that and how people die throughout the book, and how that happens in the ways that you see that they die, and when we got to that last one, and I was waiting for that one to come, and I was wondering if this was going to be a true, like, vengeance kind of death, or if this was just going to be like, this is how ridiculous it can be that somebody can be this shitty and still get taken out for no apparent reason. Like, they can just go. Like, that's the end of that one.
Well, I mean, if you made it to the end of the book, I mean, that's why I would say that it could be a little bit of both. If you made it to the end, because there's a very distinct clue near the end as to which way it goes. Now the other book,
right? Okay, I think I'm putting together things that I didn't put together before. Then, okay.
We can talk a bit after I hit the stop recording. We can go a little bit.
Oh yeah, we will. But and then the other book, Bastards of Bayou, that came because it was going to be research that I was going to turn into my dissertation, but I could not find any supporting documents. I couldn't find any primary stuff, because that whole first chapter about these people meeting in a church and hanging out and somebody getting killed, there is no spoiler, because I mean, you got to read the first chapter to get into the story, but somebody getting killed, that actually happened. And I even gave my grandfather a cameo, my grandfather on my father's side, a cameo, because he's the guy that was, as a young man, this is in the 30s, it wasn't, in the 70s like in the book, but he was a young man in the 30s, and he was trying to go meet girls at the church, because that was where you met girls. And when the shooting happened, the bullet went between his fingers on the wall. So he was posted up on the wall talking to a woman. The bullet went in between his fingers. I don't know if it was between his index and his middle, or his middle and his ring, but it went in between his fingers into the wall. And the story that he tells is he looked at his hand, he saw the bullet hole, he looked at the woman, he looked up at the church and saw the cross, and he put his hat on and walked away. And so when he told my dad this story, it was like, and he had a very thick Creole Cajun accent. But when he told my dad this, he's like, God didn't want me there. I'm like, it's like, God didn't want me there. And I'm like, that is hilarious. It's like, good thing grandma's dead. She's been dead 20 years. So it's a good thing that she doesn't know about this, because, he was just clear. He's like, that was a sign from God. What was I supposed to do? Stay there? I mean, the bullet just missed me. And the bullet that missed him actually ended up killing somebody. But that whole story has to deal with, again, burying the truth, with the whole shovel analogy, and what happens when you bury a truth and then someone else uncovers it by accident or by purpose, like what that could do to destroy a myth that has been built around that truth, or that secret, the myth that's been built around it. Like, how many people it's going to hurt, how many people it's going to affect. And it's the same thing when we're talking about history in general. When you lie, or you misteach something, or you have a mistruth or a half truth or anything like that, that the truth, when it comes out, can be so so destructive in the sense of like the idea, identities, the perspective that people had built up to where you don't know what to make of anything at that point.
If only you could read, Nelson.
I know, right?
enjoy
Is there,
it.
Oh my
is there an audio? Is there an
gosh.
audiobook?
Strangely enough, yeah, the two fictional works in an audiobook now. So
Oh, there we go.
they are, you know. In fact, the young lady who read the Magnolia Lane, I told her like from now on, I said I'm going straight to you because she did the voices. Like I wrote the book and I'm listening to the audiobook version. I'm like, oh, this is really good. What's she gonna do next? This is really good, especially that certain character that we were talking about. When
Yeah.
she was reading, I was like, oh God, I hate her. I don't like this person. Oh, I don't like this person either, because she just did such a good job of reading, whether it was supposed to be a masculine voice or feminine voice. She did such a good job of doing it where I was like, I'm calling you every time I do something in the future.
Should have had what's his face, Ed Kemper, do it, because apparently Ed Kemper, the American serial killer, he's been doing audiobooks in the state of California, and nobody knew it was him until it came after that Mindhunter, whatever that Netflix thing came out about serial killers. It was like, yeah, Ed Kemper, this like brutal serial killer, apparently does audiobooks, a lot of them, not just a few. Like he's done apparently a lot of audiobooks.
Damn it!
Like,
I
What
should've
the
gone him.
fuck?
I know, right?
No, why did that come out in the middle of fucking nowhere for you?
No, my Vyvanse is wearing off. You know how my mind is.
Yeah, tell an author to his face. Yeah, make sure it's not the serial killer doing your audiobook.
No, I
I'm
want the
saying,
serial
you know,
killer.
that's
I
the
want the
thing. It
serial
should have
killer
been
now.
Ed. You're gonna get Ed Kemper next time, and it'll be really fucking creepy.
All we need is for all the true crime nerds to come in here.
Oh man, that's it. We're transitioning. We're transitioning into a true crime podcast, y'all.
To be
That's
fair, that
our
was
breath.
Tyler that started that.
It was a
Tyler
s-
did that.
It was a stormy night. Wait, what's a good one? I don't even remember. I can't even think.
We're
of
gonna start
anything.
describing his victims like
It was a dark, stormy night in the backwoods of Alabama. Dun dun dun.
That's it. That's the story. That's the horror of it.
actually it wouldn't be dun dun dun, it'd be a banjo, wouldn't it?
No, that's Georgia. Ding, 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 ding. Burt Reynolds and some other people went to the backwoods of Georgia, and this movie sucks except for this one scene, two scenes that everyone talks about.
That's the
But-
thing, like with Deliverance, like I don't know of anybody who talks about anything else in the movie except for a couple of scenes.
Yeah, and the
that we
movie
all know about.
sucks. I remember watching in college, be like, this movie sucks, and like everyone just talks about these two like horrible scenes. It's just like, well, they have the kid playing banjo in the scene that everyone references.
Right.
It's just like this movie sucks to begin with. It's just like what is this? But anyway, that's for another episode on bad Southern stereotypes.
We need to do that episode. Damn.
God, that'd be a really fucking good episode.
I mean, it's
But-
Blue Ridge. That's where I am. Up here
Yeah.
in the foothills.
Mark just whips out a banjo. Ding, 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 ding,
If you want
ding,
another
ding,
connection,
ding.
some of the people that they interviewed to get those characters right are people that my parents used to live near in Maggie Valley in North Carolina.
Oh, shit.
If anybody knows about Maggie Valley, you understand why now.
Well, Donald, thanks for coming on. This
No,
has
of
been
course,
great. This has been great.
You better call me back to come on again.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure. I'm really glad you have an awesome setup too, because you know how many times that people on there's like it's 2 inches from their phone. Like, oh, I can hear this person. Yay. But anyway, we got an outro. So anyway, at Dixieland the Proletariat, we believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. Make sure to click on our link tree in the show notes to find a link to all our social media. We're coming to you from the birthplace of the civil rights movement, Montgomery, Alabama, as well as sweet Georgia and jolly old England. We'd like to recognize that we're recording on land that is occupied and rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Creek nations. As always, I'm Nelson. Donald, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Do you have any do you have any place that people
Yes.
can find you online?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
I
of
God, I
course.
totally forgot about that. We haven't.
That's all right.
We haven't. It's been a while. Don, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at Don Guillory. You can find me on TikTok at The Token Black Guide. And then Instagram, I think, is Token Black Guide as well. And then all my stuff, I mean, all my stuff is on that bastion of inequality. Thankfully, they're starting to get unionized on Amazon. And then the audiobooks are like everywhere. So Libro, Audible, all that stuff. So I'd rather you get the audiobooks because there's more options. I mean, no, rather you get the audiobooks, but I'd rather if you were to get the audiobook, get them from any of the other ones other than Audible, especially a place like Libro, something like that. As far as the books, there's expanded distribution. So if you can get them from a local bookstore, I definitely recommend that over, Mr. Penis Spaceship guy.
I'm gonna take my brother up to show him, hey, I'm the rich brother. Real quick, you also have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Oh yes, the podcast I co-host with my buddy James Sabata is the necronama.com, and we weekly, I mean, we're on a hiatus right now till October, but we have reached 200 episodes, and we discuss the social commentary and horror. And our most recent episode is RoboCop. It came out last week. But we've done a good number of films, some favorites, some classics, some indie horror, and we are nowhere near done because, unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, James's hard work in getting some charitable stuff going and some relationships built with Stoker means that we are not going to be done, or the Horror Writers Association means we're not going to be done until one of us dies.
And you have a link tree or a website I can drop in the show.
Yeah, I'll definitely get that to you.
Cool.
And if Jordan Peele does reach out to me to buy the rights to my book, then I will let you guys know first, and then
Nice.
we'll all go party.
Yes.
Jordan Peele, if you're listening, for some reason I don't know why you would ever listen to this podcast. If you're listening, make Donald famous. Make that book a movie. It'll be so good. And you can cast all the white people you don't like as the white people that die. Mark, take it away.
It's not the heat, it's the humidity.